There is Prosecutor Steve Schleicher talking about the anxiety and the drug addiction that George Floyd, the now decedent in this case, the one that Derek Chauvin is accused of murdering, according to the prosecution, what he suffered and why he wouldn't get in the car and how officers are trained to it. So let me bring my incredible guests in, and you know them well. Judge Brandon Birmingham, who until this trial may finally have somebody in the running who is as fair and well runs a courtroom as he does from Dallas, Texas. We watched him well, and he will always give us the straight scoop. Judge Birmingham, how are you today, sir?
Well, I'm good, but a little hurt. You know, I just thought I was the front runner, and there nobody could compete. But Judge Cahill's doing an amazing job.
In my book, you will always be the front runner. And Neama Rahmani, former federal prosecutor from California, who has been with me through this case and teaches me how to pronounce things, like in our last trial, Popovich. I won't forget you, Neama Rahmani. So let me first start with Judge Birmingham. Judge. Running high-profile trials are very difficult, and you've seen a lot of openings in them. I know you don't want to comment about whether somebody is good or bad, but in this case, when you listen to the prosecutor, does he seem to have it all together in terms of how he argues to the jury? Because he is a former prosecutor, actually. He was pulled out of private service to come help on this case.
It's such a compliment to, I think, everybody involved, and I think whether you agree with arguments that are made or being made in this case, or you agree with how they're couching the witness's testimony, you can't disagree that they are all very prepared and are putting their best foot forward, I think, for the case. In other words, I think the defense has put their best foot forward throughout this entire trial. The prosecutors obviously put their best foot forward for the entire trial, I think. And we're having what I think we're supposed to have in a trial, which is everybody gets to have what they want to be put into court, put into evidence. It really has been. And from that, the jurors are going to make this decision.
And we can all learn from watching them, including young lawyers, I assume. Neama Rahmani, you notice that Stephen Schleicher, even though the judge had previously ordered, did slip into referring in the closing Derek Chauvin as the defendant. And I think it's something that we all do. We're so used to prosecutor and defendant, although in his courtroom he didn't want George Floyd being referred to as the victim, or in the trial Derek Chauvin as the defendant. But tell me, Stephen Schleicher, did he make it seem real that this was anxiety, that this was a problem that Derek Chauvin had trained for and was supposed to deal with instead, and when he came upon the scene, instead, he just threw that training out the window?
Linda, I think Schleicher did a good job, and you compare and contrast him to Blackwell, and I like what the state did. They put Schleicher on first for the opening argument. He's a little more dry, a little bit more methodical in terms of how he discusses the evidence. Blackwell more animated, so he kept some of those good rebuttal arguments in his back pocket there. But I thought Schleicher did a good job addressing the anxiety, and really kind of the key testimony that you and I have talked about for weeks is when George Floyd was removed from the vehicle, he said, "Thank you." He was happy to be removed. He was compliant at that point. At least that's the argument that Schleicher made. And therefore, the restraint and putting him in the prone position was entirely unnecessary. I like what Schleicher did, and he went through frame by frame and discussed that evidence in great detail.
So, Neama Rahmani, let me go to you first. The defense questioned one of the witnesses, the female friend of George Floyd, and that he had in his phone, he called her mama in the phone, mama, to try to lessen the impact of when he was dying, that he was saying mama, because we were all like crying. He's reaching out for his mother. Number one, was this an effective rebuttal? And number two, does it even matter?
I don't think it was very effective. I think Nelson did a good job with the hand that he was dealt, but some of those arguments were a stretch, and that was one of them. Whether he was calling for his mother or his girlfriend, Ross, I don't think it really makes a whole lot of difference in the charges in this case, the second, third-degree murder and the second-degree manslaughter. So don't really like what Nelson did with his cross-examination of Ross there, and I thought Palomas was an outstanding spark of life witness. Love the testimony about George and his mother. I really also like him talking about George Floyd being a church-going man and his relationship with his basketball teammates, him playing football. I think he was fantastic and an outstanding spark of life witness for the state.
And Judge Brandon Birmingham from Dallas, Texas, I know you were laughing because I think the whole point of putting the decedent's picture in a homicide trial up is to try to remember that we're talking about living, breathing human beings that matter to someone, even though the defense always objects. In your case, I was objecting from here on the basis it was prejudicial. But do you also allow in Texas this type of witness or a family member to talk about their loved one? And do you find it effective?
Yeah, you do. We do allow it to a certain extent in the guilty or not guilty phase. It is that's the spark of life type witness is tethered to that part of our law which says that murder has to be against obviously a living, breathing human being, and so got to have somebody that knows the person. It is limited. It's broader, obviously, in the punishment phase of the trial, where the circumstances of the decedent's life are to be taken somewhat into account. Does it matter? I think that it's important for jurors to have a little bit of context about who both the people are. However, I really don't know that they're going to be back there saying, was it reasonable? Well, you know, he did have this wonderful relationship with his brother and his family, so maybe it was unreasonable what Derek Chauvin did. I think it gives everybody a little bit of context, gets everybody going towards their final disposition, but I don't think it really impacts either way. Whether Chauvin was reasonable or whether he should or should not have done what he did.
Yeah, that's a really good point. In this case, maybe it impacts it a little more on the basis that the defense tried to portray him as a drug addict with not much else going for him. But I think you're right, Judge, that in the usual case, it's not going to push towards guilt or innocence, I doubt. But anyhow, this is not the usual case. And when we come back after a break, we don't have the usual discussion. Our discussion is going to be with our own Brian Buckmeyer, who is about to be out there long enough that he can register to vote in Minnesota. I don't know if he will. I mean, Victoria, his wife, may have something to say about that. But maybe we'll ask him that as an aside, just to make him a little bit nervous, to try to bring a little lighthearted in this very serious case. Stay tuned. Brian Buckmeyer on the other side.